right now. Cool. Great. Thank you. I'm here along with our news editor, Aaron Mesh, whom you've met many times, I believe, in the past.
Hi,
We've done
Aaron.
this. Congressman. Your opponent, whose existence we have come to question, is not joining us today. We think she is potentially just an AI-generated figment of somebody's imagination, but we could be wrong about that. Have you met her, by the way?
Interesting. There are two opponents, and I assume the other one has not responded either.
Casey Casgrow did respond, but then Courtney, sorry, didn't show up at the end, and so it's just us, just you, me, and Aaron.
Right.
So would you start, even though we know you well, by telling us who you are, describing the contours of your district and your partisan affiliation, and then just providing a brief biography, please?
Sure. Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm Suzanne Bonamici. I represent the 1st Congressional District, which is currently all of Clatsop, Columbia, and Tillamook counties, a significant part of Washington County, and quite a lot of Multnomah County. Multnomah County is a little under 30% of the district. Washington County is still about 60% of the district. So it is the beautiful 1/6 of Oregon that's the Pacific Northwest. I have been representing the district or similar district with different lines since early 2012. And you asked who I am. I am a representative who's passionate about particularly public education. It's why I got involved in policy making. I worked my way through starting first at Lane Community College for 2 years. I was on my own, did it with grants, loans, work study, and food stamps, and then did 2 years at University of Oregon, 3 years at law school at the U of O. I then practiced law both at the Federal Trade Commission doing consumer protection and in Portland, and then became an active community member doing a significant amount of volunteer work in public education and for nonprofit organizations until I ran for the legislature, served in the state House and Senate, and I'm now a leader on the House Committee on Education and Workforce and the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. And it is an honor to represent such a vibrant and diverse district, and an honor to be in Congress.
Great, thank you. We have some questions that may strike you as random, and I want to ask first about something that's a very local issue, but it's also a national issue. And I realize that in your position as a congressperson, you don't necessarily have control, but I think it's something you're probably very interested in. That's absenteeism in Oregon schools, which ranks among the highest in the nation. Again, I know you don't have any direct control over that, but I'm interested in your thoughts about whether Congress has a role in trying to get kids to go to school more often.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Nigel, because I care so much about public education, and I know that absenteeism is a concern. Of course, things were exacerbated and complicated. Hold on just a second. I just want to adjust something on my computer here so it doesn't start playing music. Okay. Is it such a concern that absenteeism is prevalent? I know it's a concern. We have one of the things that Congress can do, and something that I'm a leader on, is use research and research-based solutions. So I am a leader on the IES program, which is educational research. Some of our research institutions, University of Oregon, for example, are very involved in education research. So we can look at the data, look at the research, look at what are proven evidence-based programs to address absenteeism. I also firmly believe that students, when they are engaged in learning, are more likely to come to school. And so when I went to Congress, one of my goals was to get rid of No Child Left Behind. One of one of the consequences of that well-intentioned bipartisan piece of legislation that actually did more, I think, more harm than good, was that it narrowed the curriculum, and a lot of schools eliminated classes that weren't part of the standardized tested classes that went into their labeling. And those included things like arts and social studies and humanities. And sometimes students are in school because they'll come to school because of the choir or the band or even the sports teams. But when things were really focused on test scores, that took a lot of joy out of learning. So that's more anecdotal, but I think important to keep in mind. I helped pass the Every Student Succeeds Act, which is the successor to No Child Left Behind, bipartisan bill when I was in the minority in 2015, but unfortunately we haven't seen it implemented with fidelity, in large part because we had 4 years of Betsy DeVos, who was interested in other things, and then the pandemic happened. So when we start seeing more focus on well-rounded education that includes the arts and engaging learning, I think we're going to see more students engaged in school and wanting to go to school. But
Okay.
that's a problem I would continue to be concerned about. And I do have frequent conversations with local and state leaders as well.
Well, thank you. One of the issues that has bubbled up repeatedly during the Biden administration is the issue of forgiveness of student loans. And
Right.
you know, that took a certain characteristic during the pandemic, and of course now we're a couple of years in theory past the pandemic. So there continue to be people who object to President Biden's direction because they may say it's inequitable, or they may have other concerns about, well, you know, what about my car loan, or what about my mortgage, or what about me? Tell us how you think about the forgiveness of student loan debt.
Happy to. Well, and I mentioned that I went to 7 years, for 2 years of community college, 2 years of college, 3 years of law school on my own. So I had student debt, but it wasn't very much. My student loans were not a concern for me. I went into public service way before the public service loan forgiveness program, and I could have gone to a law firm and made more money, but that wasn't where my heart was. But I didn't have to worry about it because, number one, my loan debt was less, and the cost of higher education was about a third of what it is now. The stories that I hear now about the amount of student loan debt is really holding people back. And here's a couple examples, or a couple ways that I look at it. First, a lot of the loan forgiveness programs have been in the public service loan forgiveness program. So that program was designed for people to incentivize people to go into public service. And the contours are, you do public service for 10 years, you make payments based on income, so lower payments. And at the end of the 10 years, your balance will be forgiven. And what happened with that program was, when the first cohort became eligible in 2017, it was Betsy DeVos, and they were approving maybe 1% of the people who submitted their loan balance to be forgiven. Well, these are people, all people in this program made academic and job decisions based on the promise of that program. So Congress in 2018 said, fix the public service loan forgiveness program. And then the next year, they were approving maybe 2 to 3%. She just was not administering it as it was intended. So a lot of that loan forgiveness is people who were given that promise and have been making payments. Another part of the loan forgiveness program is for people who have been making payments for years, but their balance is more than they owe. And I've spoken with people who are in this situation. It's not that they aren't repaying their loan. It's just that the interest is ballooning, and they owe more now than they borrowed. That's wrong. The government shouldn't be making money. And I want to, on student loan debt, and I want to say that I see education, including higher education, as a public good. And some of my colleagues might say, why should my constituents pay for your constituents' student loan debt forgiveness? Well, first of all, for the most part, people have been making some payments, but when you look at it as a public good, I might, through my tax dollars, pay for a road or a bridge that I never drive on or use. But when we look at what's good for our communities and for our economy and for society, it's a public good. But then I want to add one more thing. Uh, Sometimes there are people who are just experiencing hardship and they need to be in an income-driven repayment plan so that their payments are based on what they're earning. And so I've been working on that for quite a long time. Also working to get the Treasury to connect with the Department of Education so people don't get bumped out of those programs every year when their income needs to be re-verified. But I believe that people should not be burdened with student loan debt. So I agree with the Biden administration and the Department of Education's efforts to relieve some of that debt for people, particularly, as I mentioned, many people have been paying. I remember sitting at a roundtable conversation with some people during the sort of height of the public service loan forgiveness conversation, and one teacher said they wouldn't approve the forgiveness of my balance because I had the wrong kind of stamp on my form. And there were little reasons like that. But I've recently spoken with two people in public service who have had their balances forgiven after making payments for 10 years. And it's life-changing, not just for them, but for their families.
So, thank you. A number of publications, most notably, I think the Wall Street Journal, have looked at this issue, and they have pointed out that there's been and you alluded to this earlier, the cost of education, both for private colleges and universities, but also for public colleges and universities, has gone up far faster than inflation. It's been an arms race where colleges and universities are continuously adding new expensive amenities. And they're able to do so in part because the government has made a lot of money available through various loan programs. So in essence, we have continually priced the middle and working classes out of higher education. Congress has allowed that to happen. Congress has also been somewhat complicit by making loans available to people who may not be responsible or maybe shouldn't get those loans. So I appreciate the fact that the government is now willing to consider forgiving some of those loans, but aren't you in part responsible? I mean, the federal government in Congress, via Congress, send a tremendous amount of money to higher education. You have the ability to ask colleges and universities to stop inflating prices so quickly.
Well, I'm a former state legislator, and as we know, the Oregon has not adequately funded higher education because it's competing with, the other two big buckets of money with Health and Human Services and Public Safety and Corrections, and also within the education bucket is the K-12 and early childhood education budgets as well. So to me, education is a priority, and budgets are express our values. And so I believe in investing in higher education. I do know that a lot of the amenities, however, are not paid for with federal dollars in many places. And if you're suggesting that eligibility limits should change, I'd be happy to look at that. But right now, the Pell Grant doesn't pay for nearly the fraction of what it paid for when I went through school.
What I'm saying is that the anecdotal examples of students who are burdened with high levels of debt often include an explanation of where that debt comes from. And it comes from oftentimes government programs or government subsidized programs. My point is that we regularly see you and other members of Congress hauling the heads of major corporations in front of Congress for often very appropriate tongue lashings or browbeatings for when the tech company CEOs all come in and take a beating because they're abusing Americans' privacy or abusing consumers in various ways, or bank CEOs come in and get a beating. I guess I'm curious as to whether or not your committee or other committees are bringing college presidents not to talk about free speech, but to talk about why prices continuously go up faster than the rate of inflation.
I don't set the agenda, but I'm certainly willing to have that conversation. But in prior conversations that I've had with advocates on higher education, costs are going up in general, and I know that colleges and universities want to have the best faculty, and they are competing with the other institutes. For example, private institutions, if you're a public institution and you want the best faculty, you're competing with private institutions that have massive endowments. That's a challenge. So I'm more than willing to have that conversation. But I think at the same time, we have to look at the needs of students and look at our financial aid programs and look at when they were intended, when they were passed back in the Johnson administration as part of the civil rights era to open up more doors of opportunity. Those programs really make a difference for low income students. And we need to get to the
Absolutely.
point where that's not a barrier.
My point is, and I'll leave it at this, is that, there are two components to it. There, the ability to pay, and whether it's states like Oregon that don't fully fund education, or the lack of grant money, that's an ability to pay. But the other side of the equation is the cost, and the cost is too high and it goes up too much. Anyway, want to move on from that. Can you tell us how you're thinking about the situation in Gaza?
How I'm thinking about it all the time, with extreme concern, and I hear from people about it on a daily basis. And it isn't just the situation in Gaza; it's the situation in the region. Obviously, October 7th was a horrific attack on Israel, on the people there, and the response has also been horrific when we've seen so many innocent Palestinian families, children, and their infrastructure just lost. And I'm grieving for everyone, particularly the innocent civilians in Gaza and in Israel who have been.
So if you were able to have a conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu, and you were in a position to dictate terms as President Biden is to some degree, what would you say to him?
I would say that the absolute focus has to be with number one, saving innocent lives. Number two, getting humanitarian aid into Gaza immediately, more humanitarian aid, letting that get in there. And talk about diplomacy. Hamas needs to be disarmed, but it cannot be done at the expense of innocent lives.
What do you favor a ceasefire or not?
I called for a ceasefire in November to give an opportunity to get the hostages released. Again, I mentioned Hamas needs to be demilitarized. They are a terrorist group. And right now, I'm extremely concerned that there are still hostages and that there are still people losing their lives, and that there's still challenges getting humanitarian aid in. So I have publicly criticized Prime Minister Netanyahu for his approach to this, and his response to the terrorist attack on October 7th. And I'm very concerned about the repercussions of the loss of innocent lives and the fact that there are still hostages being held.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the issues that has come up in the past week or so is the reauthorization of the FISA surveillance bill. Could you tell us, first of all, for people who are going to watch this on their computers or at home, just summarize the bill, what the issue that you and your colleagues faced was, and explain your vote, please.
Sure. Well, the FISA reauthorization needs to be done, but it needs to be done in a way that protects privacy. So I support the version that would require warrants for U.S. citizens, and I supported an amendment that put that in the bill. And when it didn't get into the bill, I voted against it. So, of course, we need to have the security for our country, and that's what the FISA Foreign Intelligence Services Act does. But we can't put civil rights and privacy at risk. So that's why I supported one version, but not the version without those additional constitutional protections for U.S. citizens.
So you, just to clarify, because these terms are a little bit confusing to me. Yeah, you wanted warrants for U.S. citizens. Without that, there would be warrantless wiretapping. We'd go
Correct.
back to that. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we often, because of the small media world that we exist in today, we don't hear enough about what you're up to in Washington. can you tell us the single thing that you've done in the past 2 years that is most consequential to the people that you serve?
In the last 2 years,
Yes,
well, the single thing.
yes, and that
That's
you
really hard, Nigel.
that you were involved in, yeah. And if it's a bill that didn't pass, that's fine, but I want to, people want to know what
Sure.
Representative Bonamici is up to that has an impact on.
Well, it's hard to pick because in the last Congress, at the end of the last Congress, we passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act. I was most involved in the CHIPS and Science Act because I'm a senior member of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. So the package of those three bills is extremely consequential, with investments, long overdue investments in infrastructure that go way beyond roads and bridges to ports and jetties and charging infrastructure. And with the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest bill that the United States has ever passed to deal with climate, but also reducing costs on things like insulin. And then, of course, CHIPS and Science is very consequential, especially to Oregon, because what we're trying to do with that bill, and our goal is to bring back semiconductor manufacturing and to make it thrive in the United States and make the U.S. Again a leader. So, and because representing the Silicon Forest with Washington County, that's very significant because it isn't just the big semiconductor companies, it's all of the ancillary supply chain businesses as well. So I had a significant role in getting that through the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology and the House. And also I wanted to highlight the CHIPS and Science part, but the CHIPS part deals directly with semiconductors, but the and Science includes a lot of the research and workforce parts that are so important to Oregon as well.
So I'm a little unclear, so I apologize. The government gave Intel a large grant. I believe it was $8 billion or thereabouts. Is that money directly from the CHIPS and Science Act?
Yes.
Okay,
that's my understanding.
We're seeing a real rarity here. An elected official who could legitimately claim to have brought home maybe the biggest single allocation of money ever to an Oregon company. Would that be fair to say that you were part of that?
I'm definitely a part of it. I didn't do it on my own. Our senators and our state legislators had a lot to do with it as well. But we have a lot of leadership in our state, particularly in that field. We had Secretary Raimondo, the Commerce Secretary. A lot of these programs are run through the Commerce Department. We had a lot of great meetings with the Secretary and highlighted what we're doing, particularly in terms of workforce. And again, I just want to note that this doesn't just benefit the semiconductor industry. As Oregonians know, that we're an income tax based state, and so the economic impact of this is going to be significant, and hopefully that revenue is going to help us solve the other challenges that we have, like we need more affordable housing, we need more treatment. So it's all connected to really growing the economy. And the same thing with the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act as well. Those dollars are helping our communities, and also through the community project funding, formerly known as earmarks, but through the community funding project as well. I've been able to bring, because I've been in the district talking to people, listening to people, listening to needs, I've been able to help a lot with things like affordable housing through the community project funding as well as through legislation.
So you will have seen after this, if you're to be reelected, am I correct that you'll become the senior member of the congressional delegation?
That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct. Because Earl Blumenauer, my colleague Earl Blumenauer, is retiring.
So we've lost DeFazio and Blumenauer in consecutive sessions.
Yeah, that's about 60 years of seniority.
Right. So how does that play out? Do you meet do you meet with Representatives Salinas and Blumenauer currently, or how do you act as an Oregon delegation?
We have a small enough delegation so that we all know each other, and most of us served in the legislature together. I served with Cliff Benz in the legislature as well, and I worked with Andrea Salinas and Val Hoyle when I was in the legislature. So we have a close enough delegation so that we know each other. We offer often on planes together. We talk a lot. So I think it's quite an honor, but especially in a place like that's based on seniority, to lose, Peter DeFazio and Earl Blumenauer in 2 consecutive Congresses is a significant loss of experience and expertise.
What level of communication do you have with Representatives Bentz and Chavez DeRimo?
I don't know what you mean by level of
Well,
communication.
I mean, are you working together on issues that obviously you're members of different parties, but there are
Mhm.
issues that Oregonians have that affect everybody in the
Sure.
state, and that so I'm just curious how often you speak to them and whether you're working together on anything.
Well, I'm definitely working with Representative Chavez DeRemer on the FACTS Act, which is the Fentanyl Awareness for Teens in Schools Act. Children and Teens in Schools, I get these acronyms. Fentanyl Awareness for Children and Teens in Schools, the FACTS Act, which she is co-sponsoring, which is about fentanyl awareness. And as you may know, Oregon has now implemented a program that the Beaverton School District piloted based on the work of a wonderful family, John and Jennifer Epstein, who sadly lost their son. So this bill that is bipartisan, my co-sponsors are Rep. Chavez DeRemer and Representative Kevin Kiley, a Republican from California, will help scale up this program across the country and save lives. And I've also worked with Representative Chavez DeRemer on some other issues too, on dealing with some veterans infrastructure. But that's the bill that we're mostly focused on right now in the Education Committee.
Okay. We're always curious about how the transition is from working in a small state like Oregon to working on the national and international stage as you do now. What's your biggest frustration in terms of the things that you would like to do, or the ways that you would like to operate in Congress that just are not happening or haven't happened?
Well, I have to say my biggest frustration is this Congress, because we just have not been able to do what we need to do. And I was in the minority. Of course, it's always preferable to be in the majority because you can set the agenda and you can get things done like we did in the last Congress. But I was in the minority for 6 years when I first started. But this is a different Congress this time because the Republicans, the majority has structured things so that it's very, very hard to get bills to the floor. Because they have some of the MAGA extremists on both the Rules Committee and actually this motion to vacate that was part of Kevin McCarthy's negotiations threatens the speaker. So it's incredibly challenging. And I hope that changes. But at the same time, I wasn't just elected to get things done when I'm in the majority. So I've been working away, and I have been able to get some bipartisan bills through, including a bill to deal, I co-chair the Oceans Caucus, and ocean health is important. We got a couple things done with ocean health. I work on, I have a lot of bipartisan bills that are pending. I still seek bipartisan support. One of the bipartisan bills I have is for more recovery housing. There's a pilot across the country through HUD. And Oregon's not one of the states that is qualified. My bipartisan partner and I want to ramp up this program so we have more recovery housing. That hasn't passed yet, but I am always still looking for bipartisan support. I just talked to a Republican this morning about co-leading a NeighborWorks program, which is to help people get into home ownership. So there's still bipartisan work getting done. It's just getting bills through the system that is frustrating. We did pass the Bipartisan Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, though, recently, that went through the Education Committee, and that's pending in the Senate. We're hoping they pass that soon.
Okay. We're out of time, so we have a question that we're asking all candidates this session. We always have something that for your amusement. If there were to be
Sorry, before we get to the fun question, I do have one.
Oh, please.
We've been asking this to statewide officials, to federal officials. It's an uncomfortable question, but I want to ask it anyway.
Okay.
what is your observation of the role that Tina Kotek's wife is playing in her administration? Do you have any concerns? Does it raise any red flags for you? And were you in her position, would your spouse have a formal policy-making role in your office?
If I were in her position, okay. So first of all, I know Governor Kotek. We served together in the legislature. She's a person of integrity. I would have done things differently and reviewed ethics ahead of time. I'm not saying there's necessarily a problem with it, but it would depend on hugely on transparency and having that role very, very defined. I don't know what I would do in that situation. My husband and I have totally separate roles, and so I don't know what I would do in that situation. I have no interest in being in the executive branch or being a governor. But again, I have faith and confidence in Governor Kotek's integrity. I'm hoping for transparency for that process.
Thank you for answering that. I really appreciate it. Nigel, go ahead.
So the fun question is, if there were to be a movie made about your life, who would play
Highly
you?
unlikely, but
Who would play you if that highly unlikely event would?
who would play me? Gee. Well, I just saw the movie Naiad, and I was really impressed with Jodie Foster's performance. So maybe Jodie Foster.
Okay. And how old will you be on May 1st? We just want to be factually accurate in our endorsement issue.
May 1st of this year,
Yes.
69.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much for taking time to meet with
Of course,
us today.
thank you so much. Please let me
all right.
know if you find out anything about
Yes.
whether my opponent is real. I appreciate that.
Okay, will do. All right. Have a
Thank you
great
so much. And I'd be honored to earn your endorsement again.
Thanks. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative.
Thank you.